Subscribe, and let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. I love seeing where everyone's tuning in from.
The story of the so-called Phantom Hospital begins with a batch of declassified CIA financial statements from the early 70s that reference Site R12 Recovery Center, a facility allegedly used to stabilize field operatives after compromised missions. The records listed its location as a mountain valley northwest of Denver, but no such building appeared on any public or military cadastral maps. For decades, it was assumed to be a bookkeeping placeholder, a fictional site used to mass funding for psychological programs. Then in 2019, a retired Air Force photographer donated a box of old negatives to a museum in Colorado Springs. Among landscapes and base shots were 12 eerie photographs showing a 3-story medical complex built in the style of early Cold War government architecture. Straight concrete walls, narrow mirrored windows, an oversized ventilation tower. Snow-covered mountains framed the structure, and on one image a faded sign read, R12 Intake. Investigators cross-checked the coordinates written on the envelope, but the corresponding area on Google Earth held only untouched forest and a winding dirt road ending at a cliff. When archivists approached the county to compare land records, they were told that no building permit had ever been filed in that region, not in 1960, not in 1972, not ever. Even stranger, a former CIA logistics officer interviewed for a documentary insisted the hospital was real. He claimed to have delivered classified shipments there twice, yet he couldn't recall driving up or down any mountain road. He described the journey instead as too short, as if the place wasn't where the map said it should be. The negatives were scanned at high resolution, and analysts noticed faint distortions around the edges of the building, almost like heat haze. Digital forensics confirmed the photos weren't edited. Whatever the Phantom Hospital was, it had once physically existed, or something made to look like it had. As researchers dug deeper into the Phantom Hospital, they found an internal CIA memo dated March 1966 describing post-operative stabilization protocols for agents exposed to extreme psychological stress, chemical substances, or experimental sensory manipulation techniques. The memo referenced an isolation wing with observation rooms equipped with mirrored panels, white noise emitters, and sedation tubing built directly into the bed frames. But the most unsettling part was the mention of non-standard recovery cases, individuals whose memory fragmentation required environmental resets, a phrase that appeared nowhere else in the archives. When journalists attempted to match personnel names from the memo with real identities, 6 of the listed doctors had no public records before 1974, and one, Dr. Harold Elmbridge, had a death certificate dated 2 years before his supposed employment at R12. Around the same time, a hiker posted an online story describing how he and 2 friends stumbled upon a concrete foundation deep in the San Isabel National Forest. The slab was perfectly rectangular, and metal rods jutted from the ground as if a large structure had been cut away from above. Radiation readings were normal, but a compass refused to point north within 50 feet of the site. When the group returned a week later to take better photographs, the foundation was gone, replaced by dirt that looked freshly packed, still darker than the surrounding soil. Their original photos showed the same building footprint as the one from the 1960s negatives. Experts tried to locate similar anomalies in satellite archives, but the earliest imagery from the 70s showed nothing there at all, as if the foundation had appeared only for that brief moment in the hiker's visit. Some theorized the hospital had been demolished in secret. Others believed it had been moved, and a small but growing group suspected something stranger, that the hospital never stayed in one fixed place to begin with. By the time investigators reached the most obscure documentation, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. References to transitory infrastructure and mobile recovery assets, terms far too elaborate to describe ordinary field tents. One heavily redacted briefing from 1969 described a program codenamed Spectre Haven, whose objective was the development of a relocatable medical site for high-risk agents requiring memory suppression, debriefing, or rapid isolation. The facility was said to operate on a variable coordinate deployment cycle, implying it could be assembled and disassembled in days. Yet this contradicted the photographs, which showed a massive, permanent building. That contradiction deepened when audio tape surfaced from an abandoned storage unit in Aurora, Colorado. The tapes featured interviews with unidentified patients recalling a silent hospital where lights flickered without bulbs and the hallways seemed longer at night. One man insisted the building shifted while he slept. He woke up seeing mountains on the wrong side of his window. A woman reported hearing footsteps above her room, even though she'd been told she was on the top floor. Forensic audio experts confirmed the tapes dated to the late 60s, but background noise analysis revealed something unexpected. The ambiance didn't match the acoustics of a concrete facility. It sounded like thin walls, flexible materials, and a hollow metallic undertone, more like a large prefabricated structure than a permanent one. If the Phantom Hospital was both mobile and photographed as permanent, the only explanation was that the CIA operated multiple versions, or phased iterations, of the same facility. And if so, the final mystery wasn't where the hospital went after 1972, but how many times it had already appeared without anyone noticing. The breakthrough came when an anonymous former Navy engineer, calling himself Markel, sent investigators a packet containing technical schematics stamped R12 modular array, dated 1958. The diagrams outlined a bizarre architectural system, a hospital composed of interlocking steel composite modules designed to be transported by rail, reassembled in remote terrain, then skinned with concrete panels to mimic a permanent building. The documents described collapsible stairwells, inflatable insulation cavities, and a ventilation tower that could be detached and moved separately. The schematics even matched the ventilation tower visible in the old photographs, but the strangest element was something labeled dynamic shell layer, a flexible outer membrane that could control thermal signatures and optical interference. Analysts interpreted this as an early stealth tech experiment, but the engineering was decades ahead of its time. When the team attempted to locate manufacturing records for the modules, they discovered that the serial numbers didn't correspond to any known contractor. Instead, they matched a series of unregistered rail shipments recorded in 1961. 5 cargo trains departing from the East Coast. Destination: temporary health facility, West. The freight logs ended abruptly and no arrival was recorded. Weeks later, a retired geologist from the region contacted the investigation, claiming he had once seen a hospital being moved. In 1967, he observed military trucks hauling massive rectangular structures across a dry lake bed near the Colorado-New Mexico border. At the time, he assumed it was part of a movie set, but the shapes matched the module dimensions in the leaked schematics. When shown the old hospital photos, he visibly paled and said the building looked too familiar. What troubled investigators most was the timeline. If the hospital was modular, then it could have been assembled, dismantled, and reassembled multiple times between 1960 and 1972, appearing in different remote locations while leaving almost no trace. But there was still one unanswered question. Why did the CIA need a medical facility that could disappear on command? Hints emerged from a set of testimony transcripts discovered in a university archive, left behind by a retired intelligence psychologist. Among the papers were interviews with agents who had undergone treatment at a classified mountain facility. Their descriptions were consistent: identical windowless corridors, metal beds with restraints disguised as safety belts, and a hum that vibrated through the walls even when the power was supposedly off. One subject described being placed in a recovery room where the ceiling was covered in small silver discs that pulsed whenever he tried to recall certain memories. Another remembered hearing a doctor tell a colleague, "If this session leaks, the shell won't hold." The transcripts included references to phase recalibration, a procedure that seemed to involve forcing the patient to relive an event repeatedly under sedation until their recollection fragmented. This technique did not appear in any publicly known CIA program. When researchers tried to trace the psychologist who recorded the transcripts, they learned he had vanished in 1991, leaving behind an empty home and a mailbox filled with unopened letters. Additional clues surfaced when a whistleblower released a faded incident report from 1971 about a containment breach at R12. According to the redacted text, an unidentified patient escaped confinement and wandered into the unassembled East Sector, an area made of exposed steel frameworks rather than finished rooms. The patient reportedly saw open sky through a seam in the wall, proof that part of the building was incomplete or being moved. Minutes later, security located him unconscious near a stack of modular panels. The report ended with a chilling line: the subject retained no memory of the event after reintegration. This reinforced the emerging theory that the phantom hospital wasn't just meant to heal agents. It was used to erase or overwrite critical memories. And if true, what exactly were those agents exposed to?
The final major lead came from a weathered metal case recovered by a recreational diver, exploring a minor reservoir in southern Colorado. Inside the case were medical vials, rusted instruments, and a logbook partially ruined by moisture. What remained legible suggested the kit belonged to a field medic assigned to R12. The log contained brief notes about transporting patients during relocation cycles, dates crossed out and rewritten with different numbers, and multiple references to shell stability tests. One note described a storm disrupting a relocation, causing visual bleed in the exterior shell, an anomaly that temporarily revealed the hospital's underlying metal frame. The medic wrote that the effect lasted fewer than 10 minutes but risked exposure to passing aircraft. Another note mentioned a stage for override, where patients were moved through a corridor that no longer matched the map. The medic described it as a hallway that seemed to stretch longer each time he walked it, suggesting either architectural illusion techniques or genuine structural inconsistencies during assembly. Engineers who reviewed the notes argued that modular misalignment could cause such distortions, but others noted that the descriptions implied a dynamic interior, walls shifting, corridors bending, more like a psychological manipulation environment than a malfunction. In the final pages, the medic wrote of an unscheduled shutdown order in late 1972, instructing all staff to abandon the current site within 72 hours. He added that the hospital would be folded, a term not used anywhere else in the archives. Days later he recorded his last entry: "They are taking the shell apart tonight. They say we will not return to this valley again. If the next site stabilizes, the project continues. If not, we end it here." This supports the theory that R12 may have been relocated one final time, before being erased from all records. But whether the hospital was dismantled, buried, or transported to another remote region remains unknown. The final question facing investigators is whether the Phantom Hospital still exists. In 2021, satellite imagery analysts noticed a strange rectangular heat anomaly in a remote plateau area of northern Arizona. The shape was nearly identical to the foundation seen in earlier leaked materials, yet no building appeared in visible spectrum images. When thermal scans were compared across multiple days, the anomaly shifted slightly, as if some unseen object beneath the ground was being powered on and off. Around the same time, two campers reported hearing a low mechanical hum at night accompanied by faint lights glowing through the soil, though no facility was visible. The most disturbing evidence came from a former intelligence contractor, who provided a cryptic file labeled R1 to continuity. Inside was a single line of text: "The shell is dormant, not destroyed." This suggests the hospital, or at least its core modules, may still be intact, stored somewhere underground or maintained by an unknown agency. Experts now theorize that the Phantom Hospital may have transitioned into a successor project after 1972, perhaps automated or repurposed for new forms of psychological conditioning. If the facility was truly mobile, capable of blending into terrain, shifting locations, and altering interior environments, then it may still lie assembled in some uncharted valley, waiting for activation. Others fear that patients could still be inside, sedated, monitored, forgotten, victims of a vanished program that officially never existed. The last unresolved clue is a recently discovered satellite photo from 1989, showing a faint rectilinear structure in central Utah. The file metadata indicates it was manually flagged by an analyst and then immediately sealed. Attempts to access it today return a classified legacy program notice. Whether this is R12's final resting place, or merely another phantom, remains uncertain. But one thing is clear: the hospital's disappearance was not an accident, it was part of its design. And if a structure built to vanish succeeds to well, the question becomes not why it was hidden, but whether it ever fully left.
Subscribe, and let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. I love seeing where everyone's tuning in from.